This is the story of an illusion of absolute power shattering in real time. On Easter Sunday of 2026, the entire architecture of the British monarchy shifted in plain sight. And it happened through a single devastatingly coordinated visual humiliation. As the royal family gathered at Windsor Castle, every camera in Britain locked onto the procession entering St. George's Chapel. Prince William walked forward with Princess Catherine right beside him. Their 3 children flanked them like an unbreakable wall. After years of brutal headlines, whispered absences, and media speculation that the Wales family was quietly unraveling under the pressure of profound illness, they were back. They were unified, locked in, and projecting absolute institutional dominance. But what veteran palace watchers noticed was not just who was standing there. It was the precise, weaponized placement of everyone else in the frame. Right beside William stood Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, and his son James. Princess Anne was positioned close by, with Peter Phillips forming the outer edge of the gathering. The core bloodline of the House of Windsor had pulled tightly into a defensive fortress around the future king. Now look for Queen Camilla's people. Look for the inner circle that had orbited her side of the royal picture for years. They were completely erased from the frame. Prince Andrew, the disgraced brother she had never publicly exiled, despite the global scandals, was nowhere to be seen. His daughters Beatrice and Eugenie did not attend either. Every single person who represented Camilla's consolidated influence over the current reign had been surgically removed from the formation. At an event of this magnitude, nothing is accidental. Every position is a deliberate institutional choice. That photograph was not just a picture, it was a verdict. It was the exact moment Camilla realized that the walls had closed in, and she had been quietly forced out the side door of the future monarchy. What this video will unpack is the staggering exploitation of protocol Camilla attempted behind closed doors. How Prince William and Prince Edward meticulously mapped her paper trail, and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. This is a forensic look at the mechanism of a modern royal purge. It is the story of how the true heirs of the crown utilized the very system Camilla thought she controlled to orchestrate her institutional erasure. By the end of this analysis, you will understand the devastating realization that is currently echoing through Camilla's corridors. She actually owns nothing, controls nothing, and has finally run out of time. To understand why this silent retaliation hit with such devastating force, you have to look back at the illusion of power Camilla spent 3 decades carefully constructing. She had played the longest, most calculating game in modern royal history. She survived the public fallout of shattering one of the most beloved marriages in the world. She weathered the enduring ghost of Princess Diana, systematically attempting to erase Diana's legacy while slowly elevating her own image through friendly media channels. She pushed to integrate her non-royal children into the periphery of the crown, securing them prominence at major events. And she operated under the absolute belief that she had King Charles completely unconditionally controlled. By early 2023, Camilla felt entirely untouchable. She believed she had not just survived the institution, but that she had conquered it. And that staggering arrogance is exactly what triggered her catastrophic overreach. The signs of her quiet power grab were hidden in plain sight, weaponized through the oldest royal language in the world, which is jewelry. In February 2023, during an engagement in East London, Camilla stepped out wearing a piece that made palace insiders go completely still. It was a brooch crafted in the shape of the Tudor crown, a silver frame layered with sapphires, rubies, and emeralds. Here's why that detail matters. The Tudor crown is not a decorative motif. It is the central defining symbol of King Charles's official royal cipher. It is the literal emblem of his sovereign authority pressed into metal and stone. Camilla fastened the king's own symbol of absolute power to her chest and paraded it in front of the cameras. Royal historians and jewelry experts are unambiguous about what this means. In palace life, brooches are never mere accessories. Placed intentionally near the heart, they carry heavy, unwritten declarations of loyalty, authority, and hierarchy that no speech ever could. The message Camilla broadcasted that day was deafening. It said she was not just standing beside the king. It said she was carrying his crown, she was co-sovereign, and she was permanent. Senior aides were reportedly blindsided by the brazenness of the move. This was not a tribute to the monarchy. It was Camilla staking a territorial claim over it. But that was just the prologue. The moment that truly crossed the line from arrogance into moral outrage occurred 3 months later. When King Charles was crowned in May 2023, Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey wearing jewels pulled directly from the most intimate archives of Queen Elizabeth II. The crown placed on Camilla's head had been reset with the Cullinan III. 4 and 5 diamonds. These were not generic ceremonial stones. These were the legendary diamonds Queen Elizabeth had affectionately called Granny's Chips, worn as her personal signature brooch for 7 decades. The country had watched those diamonds resting on Elizabeth's shoulder through triumphs, tragedies, and national mourning. The grief over the late Queen was still incredibly raw. The public had not finished mourning the woman who had stood as the dignified, uncomplaining antithesis to everything Camilla represented. To see a woman who had spent 30 years being deeply despised by the British public reach into a dead queen's jewelry box and extract her most personal treasures was perceived as a staggering exploitation of the moment. It was a gut punch to the national psyche. Camilla was not just wearing jewels. She was attempting to wear the armor of a beloved monarch, trying to force an association the public vehemently rejected. Every time she reached for something that belonged to the legacy of Diana or Elizabeth, the old wounds cracked open and bled again. The numbers reflected exactly what the public felt. In his memoir, Prince Harry had delivered a cold surgical warning to the world. He called his stepmother dangerous. He detailed how she fed stories to the press, sacrificing anyone in her path to rehabilitate her own image. He framed her as an operative who built a public relations campaign on the wreckage of the people around her. By 2026, the data proved him right. Camilla's public approval ratings collapsed to a dismal 42%, while the number of people who actively viewed her negatively climbed to 45%. Now, place that collapse beside the quiet ascent of Prince Edward. For 30 years, Edward was the invisible prince, a man 15th in line to the throne who simply put his head down and did the work without complaint. Suddenly, his approval rating surged past 50%, with negative views barely registering at 19%. A man the media ignored for decades was now vastly more trusted than the woman wearing the crown. In a monarchy where public approval is the only real currency of survival, this gap was an institutional earthquake. It quietly changed who held the leverage. Camilla felt the ground shifting beneath her, but she failed to anticipate the trap that was already being laid by the quietest members of the family. The catalyst for the final rupture came through what looked like a routine administrative update, but was actually a deeply personal insult. When King Charles was forced to step back from public duties following his cancer diagnosis, the monarchy faced an existential visibility crisis. Prince Edward and his wife, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, stepped forward immediately. Without being asked, they took on punishing solo international tours across Papua New Guinea and Japan. They represented the king and the United Kingdom on high-stakes, high-visibility engagements with absolutely no safety net beneath them. They carried the crushing weight of a fractured institution, and then in April 2024, Charles released his honours list. Queen Camilla was recognised. Prince William and Princess Catherine were recognised. Camilla's inner circle. The Operator's Palace insiders, notoriously referred to as the Rottweilers, were protected and rewarded. Prince Edward and Sophie were entirely omitted. They were not mentioned once. The omission was so glaring that the press flagged it immediately. But Edward and Sophie responded with total suffocating silence. They did not leak a single complaint, they simply kept working. Inside the palace, that kind of disciplined silence is not weakness. It is a terrifying display of control. Edward received the message that Camilla's operatives would always be prioritised over his blood, sweat and loyalty. And from that exact moment, his loyalty to Charles's court evaporated, and he aligned himself entirely exclusively with Prince William. What happened next was the cold execution of a structural purge. Edward did not scream. He used the administrative protocol of the palace to begin dismantling Camilla's alliances. The first target was Prince Andrew. For years, Andrew had clung to Royal Lodge, a sprawling mansion that served as proof he was still protected by the crown. In early 2025, that protection was revoked. He was forced out and relocated to Wood Farm, a heavily isolated property on the Sandringham estate. But Andrew's presence there ruined a fiercely guarded private Easter tradition that Edward and Sophie had maintained for years. When Andrew was subsequently caught up in further public scrutiny, King Charles, who was just 1 mile away at Sandringham, did nothing. It was Edward who walked through the door. Edward did not go to comfort his disgraced brother. He went to end it. He delivered the hard, uncompromising truth that Andrew needed to vacate the premises and stop dragging the monarchy into the mud. Edward walked in, executed the eviction notice, and walked out without flinching. That is the man who stood next to William at Easter in 2026. Simultaneously, Sophie began executing her own silent retaliation. She did not skip royal engagements at random. Royal analysts tracking the footage noticed a devastating pattern. Sophie systematically withdrew from every specific event where Camilla sat at the center. Every absence was a highly calculated political strike, designed to ensure Sophie was never visually or politically captured inside Camilla's sphere of influence. Together, Edward and Sophie were drawing a very clear line in the sand, and William was watching. This brings us back to that Easter photograph, the moment the trap finally snapped shut. What Camilla realized looking at that unified wall of William Catherine, Edward and Anne, was that the future court had already been built. And she was completely locked out. William and Edward had quietly rewritten the institutional map. Camilla realized that the Tudor brooch, the Cullinan diamonds, the sprawling stuff, none of it belonged to her. It was all borrowed. It all depended on Charles breathing. The moment the era changes, William holds the keys to the vaults, the estates and the titles. The silent retaliation was complete. Camilla was sitting on a throne of borrowed power, and she had just realized that the true heirs had already changed the locks. The true terror of losing power is not the moment you are overthrown. It is the moment you reach for the lever you have pulled 1,000 times before, and you realize it is no longer connected to anything. When the reality of that Easter Sunday formation set in, when Camilla realized that Prince Edward, Princess Anne, and Prince William had built a visible, impenetrable wall that completely excluded her inner circle, she did what she had done for 30 years. She turned to King Charles. For 3 decades, Charles had been her ultimate shield. He had weaponized his own public relations team against his sons to secure her reputation. He had defied his mother, Queen Elizabeth, to legitimize their relationship. He had bent the entire institution to ensure a crown was placed on her head. Camilla fully expected Charles to intervene to reprimand Edward, to force William to bring her people back into the fold. But what happened next was the psychological climax of this entire saga. Charles did absolutely nothing. His silence was devastating. Faced with his own mortality battling cancer and managing a monarchy that was hanging by a thread, the king looked at the political landscape and made a cold, calculated choice. He recognized that Prince William is not just his son anymore. William is the future, and more importantly, William is the only thing keeping the monarchy relevant to a younger generation. Charles could not afford to wage war against his own heir, nor could he afford to alienate Edward and Sophie, the only working royals keeping the international schedule afloat. For the first time in their entire relationship, when Camilla begged for protection from the institution, Charles chose the institution over her. That silence was the ultimate emotional betrayal. It was the moment Camilla understood that her absolute control over the king had officially expired. This psychological defeat immediately exposed a much darker structural reality that palace insiders refer to as her commercial desperation. The public looks at Queen Camilla wearing priceless diamonds and assumes she possesses limitless wealth and power. But the illusion of absolute power relies on the public not understanding how royal finances actually work. The cold forensic truth is that Camilla actually owns almost nothing. She does not control the vast estates. She does not control the sovereign wealth. The true financial engine of the royal family is the Duchy of Cornwall, a $1 billion private estate that generates over £20 million in liquid cash every single year. The moment Queen Elizabeth died, that entire estate transferred instantly and automatically to Prince William. William now controls the money that funds the private lives of the royal family. He literally owns Highgrove House, King Charles's most beloved sanctuary. Charles actually has to pay rent to his own son just to live there. Camilla has spent years acting as the supreme matriarch of properties, where she is, legally speaking, nothing more than a tenant. Her sprawling public relations machine, her private stylists, her inner circle of gatekeepers, all of it is funded by Charles's income. The moment Charles is gone, the funding vanishes. She does not inherit the duchy. She does not inherit the crown estates. She will be entirely dependent on whatever allowance King William decides to grant her. William has spent years mapping her paper trail, watching her operatives leak stories about his wife to the press, and watching her spend millions to rehabilitate her image. The commercial desperation settling over Camilla right now is the realization that the man she spent years undermining will soon hold the keys to her bank accounts, her housing, and her security. This is where the silent retaliation moves from administrative punishment to historical restoration. As Camilla's borrowed empire begins to dismantle, Catherine is quietly taking her rightful place, and she is doing it without raising her voice. 4 years Catherine endured the indignity of Camilla's relentless maneuvering. She watched Camilla attempt to overshadow her. She watched Camilla's team freeze out her allies. But Catherine never complained, she never leaked a counter-narrative to the tabloids. She simply anchored herself to duty, survived a profound health crisis, and returned with an aura of absolute untouchability. The visual symbols of this shifting power dynamic are impossible to ignore if you know where to look. Following the Easter Sunday maneuver protocol, changes began moving through the palace like a quiet seismic wave. Access to the royal vaults, which Camilla had heavily dominated since the coronation, is being subtly rerouted. William is taking an active granular interest in the inventory of the royal collection, ensuring that the pieces most closely associated with Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana are preserved for the true future of the crown. That detail matters. When Catherine stepped out at recent state banquets wearing the Lover's Knot tiara, the piece most famously associated with Princess Diana, she was not just wearing jewelry. She was visually restoring Diana's legacy right in front of the woman who spent 30 years trying to erase it. William's silent, enduring grief for his mother has never faded. He simply weaponized it into patience. He did not scream at Camilla in the press. He waited for the exact moment when the power dynamics shifted, and then he used the administrative weight of the monarchy to ensure Diana's bloodline reclaimed absolute control over the narrative. The removal of Camilla's inner circle from that Easter photograph was not a petty family squabble, it was a structural eviction. It was Prince Edward, Prince William, and Princess Anne aligning to execute a masterclass in institutional preservation. They looked at the commercial desperation and the staggering exploitation Camilla represented, and they quietly closed the vault. There will be no side door access to the throne. There will be no lingering authority when the reign ends. The transition is already happening in plain sight. Every protocol update, every guest list, and every locked door is sending the exact same message. The illusion is over. The true heirs are in the room, and they are never leaving again. If you found this analysis of the royal family's silent power dynamics insightful, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below on how you think. The monarchy will look when William finally takes the throne.